Okay, it says I'm live. Welcome to NARCon 2023. I'm Vince Huegele. I'll be the speaker for this session, and it's entitled Launch Experiments with High Power. I bring you greetings from Rocket City, Huntsville, Alabama, where I'm coming from and where I've lived for the last 40 years. So I'm going to hopefully share the screen here, and we'll see that there's my title slide. Hopefully you are seeing that. We'll be launching student experiments with high power. I know it's early in the morning on a Saturday, but hope that everybody is hearing this and getting ready to have a good virtual NARCon, how helpful this is to be able to do it. I have been doing rockets forever. And I was looking at this. I launched my first rocket in 1965. And doing the math, it's another year now. And I have been an Estes customer for 58 years, and that's hard to imagine. Hard to believe that I've been doing it that long and that I've got rockets that old. It's been fun. I was never a born-again rocketeer. I was always faithful and always participating. Mall Rocketry was exciting in the 60s with the space program going. And I enjoyed flying then. I was excited about science. I've always been interested in the space program. I went and got a bachelor's in physics and a master's in engineering, and then ended up working for NASA finally for 35 years. I retired about 6 years ago, and still I retired from NASA, but I'm not retired from rocketry. Still the NAR education chairman, and I'm still doing science projects, students. Not seeing any chatter yet or anybody asking questions, but I assume that I'm still on here to work. So what we're going to talk about today is some of the programs that I've been working in for the past 30 years in helping students to launch experiments and learn things about science and math with model rocketry. And I'll cover those programs, but I'll also talk to you about how you can start your own student launch program with your club. If you are in high power, an individual or a club, you can take your rockets and connect with students in the classroom and put together a science program and launch their rockets just like you can in working with TARC. In fact, what I'm going to describe is a really good follow-up on got TARC program going have met launching eggs and want to launch something else, so they can do that in high power rocketry. So you can explore other missions besides TARC, very similar organization to those kind. And if you already have high power rockets, you can use those to launch student experiments. Going to cover 30 years of the Huntsville Area Rocketry Association, where I've been here in Alabama. We went through 4 programs, and each program built on the others and developed into more complicated, better organized presentations on how to do student experiments. And it's interesting in the 90s, things that came together to create the availability for launching student rockets with high power. For one thing was that high power was coming into existence in the early 90s. The motors were available, individuals could get them. You were making bigger rockets, and you can always, with any kind of rocket you have, you can launch a payload. But if you only have D and F motors, you really can't get much altitude or carry much of a load or much lifting capability with those rockets. So with high power coming online, you could get bigger rockets, you had more payload capability, and it facilitated student experimentation a lot more because now you could launch something more than just an egg. Let's see, a little bit of a glitch here. More than that, just an egg. And it was in its infancy, the high power was, but at the same time in the 90s, there was this awareness now country that was coming up with knowing that American students were falling behind in international test scores, and something needed to be done to boost the interest in science and math. And this was when the term STEM came into our culture. Science, technology, engineering, and math was shown to be weak in American schools. What could educators do to make science and math more interesting? Well, robots, rockets, yeah, we have rockets. So there was the interest by the education community of looking for science, looking for things to use for hands-on science training. And rocketry lent itself very well to that for regular low-power rocketry, but also with the capability with the bigger rockets. And with an interest in putting this all together, we were able to create our first launch program, which was called in HERA was Suborbital Academic Research, or SOAR. And what this program was, some of the NAR members got together and wanted to do this. They had connections with some educators and some teachers, and their idea was to build a high power rocket and put student experiments in it. And this, had not been done before because it had never been done before. It wasn't possible because the motor available and the technology was just now beginning. So we modeled the program pretty much after the payloads that are flown on Space Lab and created a mission management model from that, where we would work with the students. They would be the principal investigators to design the experiments, but we would be the launch operations who would build the rocket and fly it for them. And that way, the students were doing what they could do, and the rocket people could do what they had to do to get the launches done. Our first flight had 3 schools. One was a high school, which had a atmospheric sampling device in it, which would try to detect aerosols as it went into the higher atmosphere. And the rocket was a K motor. I'll show that in a minute. It was only going to go, I don't know, 3,000 or 4,000 feet. That's still pretty good, and certainly more than a lot of students could have access for an experiments. We also had from Georgia Tech a ham radio transmitter we were going to launch. We had a big ham radio person in our club who wanted to do this, and they were all excited about sending up a transmitter that would put a signal out that would go regional, and hopefully all the other ham stations could listen in and detect what was going on and contribute data. And they're just, people are all into that. They always want to play on their radio, and so we were giving a chance for that. Ed Steluca was from NASA. He was the mission manager, and he put together a lot of our logistics and plans. And he loved to make charts, and these were great. And along the top, he had these were the meetings. These were the milestones for building the rocket, for integrating it. And what we did in our program was we launched each student experiment individually on a test flight to make sure we had all our procedures figured out, the students knew what they were doing, and that the experiment would withstand launch loads on a G motor going up 600 feet or so. And that would prove that all these units would work. It's not just trying to exemplify the NASA process, but it's a good way to do something if you're doing a technical project, is you test things individually and then you fly them collectively. So all the experiments, the big with the K motor, and we have all the milestones shown there. So this was one of the G flights. This was one of the a Lock 4 kit. It was mostly cardboard at the time, but we used it. We had a payload section added, and we tested out the various experiments to make sure that they would work. And you find out, you got to do this to find out that your batteries aren't in very well and lose power when the motor kicks on, or that your batteries don't last long enough for when your rocket is sitting on the pad and you're waiting for the weather to settle down. And all these things that you learn by doing testing on a small scale to begin with, and then going up to the larger scale. So this was the flight model of the first launch, 4-inch diameter and about 5 feet long on a Volt. Air sampling device, and the RD experiment had antenna that deployed at ejection, and those are the lines on the side. You had little wires that popped out to kind of boost the broadcast signal. Now, what you have to understand, in 1990, there was no dual deploy recovery, had not been invented. Altimeters commercially did not exist. If you wanted to use one to deploy your parachute, you had to build it. We depended on engine ejection for deployment. And for a K motor going up several thousand feet, we learned a lot about deployments and the need for testing, and all that was a steep learning curve for modelers, but also in the program when you're working with kids. So we had, out of the 5 flights, 3 of them worked real well. It was really a good program. You can see the T-shirt that Palmer has on. You always have to have a patch or a logo or something with your program. So we had that for Project SOAR, and that was a lot of fun. You try to make it as fancy and as professional as possible. So that was very productive. We learned how to work with schools and high schools and universities, to connect with the teachers, how to manage a schedule, how to get it all together, and then how to have fun, launching the rockets and giving them back to the students. The next program that we got into was led by another club member, Greg Warren, who is on his own into the educational world and created the Student Experiments Payload program. And what he did was very similar to SOAR. He had rockets that were containing student experiments, but rather than just launch a couple of them, he put out requests for most of the Athens, Decatur, Huntsville school system to invite them to participate. He had this planned out very well. He got funding from different
the program, and he had several
flights very successful during the time that the program was going on. Greg was one of the first people to have a website because, again, this is the early 90s and internet had barely been born. So he had a website going on, but another cool thing that he did to introduce and conduct his program was he had got a guy draw up a comic book for him, and he distributed this to the schools. It illustrates
how rockets work, how payloads work
that are put into rockets, and then how you can participate by being your own principal investigator,
a science experiment, and participating
in SEP to get it launched. And that worked really well. That was a lot of fun. There were 4 main members
that were different and apart from
the NAR.
Got a lot of connections, a lot of rocket
exposure to the community with that. Even though we had the websites were invented, the main way of
back in the early 90s was
with a newsletter. This was your blog, this was your brochure, this was your promotional material, this was your outreach, and all the information and the progress that SEP did was in their flamethrower newsletter that worked really well. And Greg learned a lot about putting all that together, the formality of the program, the logistics of doing that, and it worked really well, particularly developing this modular form of experimentation where he really just gave the kids a Tupperware can and said, okay, you can
in this,
but you got to keep it inside this little box. And that is really what you have to do when you're launching payloads on commercial rockets anyway. So that was a good illustration and exercise for how to do launching experiments. Following from
the Marshall Space Flight Center
started an Explorer Post. Back in those days, an Explorer Post was similar to a Boy Scout troop, except it was mixed. You had guys and girls in it, and it was typically sponsored by a local company that would host different events for the students, give them tours of facilities, bring in speakers, and have some kind of little project called for them. And it was called 2001 because of the, it was in the 90s, but 2001 was, of course, still the big theme from Space Odyssey and represented the future. And also being very formal, we had the hats to go with it, with the a patch and a logo there, the Explorer Post with the Boy Scout logo, calling it 2001 A Space Reality. So this was developed by
Marshall within NASA,
who had done some posts before. It was done to be an outreach and a community presence for the Rocket Center, and brought in students from all of the local schools. It was cool to meet rocket scientists and tour test facilities and all the things out here at Marshall, but you needed to have an activity for the students. So why not have them build rockets? And we did this in several phases. We started out with low power, where we had them build some Estes kits with Estes motors and took them out and flew them. Then we worked up into mid power, which was really more about F and G size rockets, and we had them build those. And this was all trying to culminate in a large high power rocket that would be designed by the students and built by them, but it'd be closely supervised by and then
the advisors
who were administrating the program to try to keep it all on schedule and to make it work. So the design that came up with was K-powered. It was actually a half-scale Patriot kit, which was modified to have a payload section. They created a flight recorder and some different instrumentation to detect things that would be flown. And then what was added in this program that was above what the others had done was the review process. That this was NASA, so you had to have reviews and documentation of everything you did, which was a good lesson to go through, because that's what you're going to have to do out in the real world if you become a professional rocket scientist. So the kids had to document their work, have their engineering notebooks, take from, and because again,
And this was
mid
the 90s.
and you actually had physical plastic slides. For some of you may remember those in your job field, but that was so old school. But we taught the kids how to do that. We made them get up and do the presentations themselves, so they would learn public speaking and communication skills. And that all went really well. It was another level of training, and it was certainly ultimately realism. And when the kids did the presentations, they would be doing it in front of real NASA engineers. And this was the one way to showcase the program to the rest of the center and to center management so that they could appreciate the outreach that was going on. And it was also to maintain support and also, give the managers and the bosses a chance to see what's going on and to have some fun with younger group. The way the programs were organized, I have from that the students an overview of how do all these teams work. What is the division of responsibility and the technical disciplines that you have to be involved in? Well, you have a mission team which kind of oversees everything. They do the documentation, the charts, the schedule, the budget. You have a launch team which is involved in the actual setting up the pad and prepping the rocket. The rocket team builds the rocket, and you have the breakdown of structures group, the aerodynamics, propulsion, recovery, and all these different disciplines that you learn in building the rocket. But then also the payload team works with science of let's try to measure and test something in this flight. It was more electronic in nature, so that there was soldering and circuit boards involved in doing that. And then it all needed to be tested and brought together and doing it through the typical space program.
This other chart, which shows how all these
aspects of a mission overlap. It's a big lesson in systems engineering that we were teaching of how all this worked and how these things were connected. And you couldn't just put a bunch of batteries in your payload. You had to consider the weight, you had to consider heat, you had to consider RF interference, all these things that are real rocket issues. We put on the students to help them learn, because they were doing most of the building here. This was a different program of just taking a payload and launching it for them. We were having them build the rocket themselves. So what NASA wanted to do was ended up treating this student program like a real NASA program. And that was unfortunate, because that made it more complicated than it needed to be. We had the phase 3, the high power one,
the Estes, and
phase 2 was Arctic, and so this was the big one. And we had a flight readiness review, but there were 3 levels to it. And every time we would go through a level, there would be action items given, because that's what board reviews do. Is they always, they can't just say you're done, you're fine. They have to add things to it to make it more thorough and complete, and find discrepancies. Well, these are kids, they don't need that much detail, and yet that's what ended up going on. This was the org chart of all the advisors that worked on the program, and this was totally internal to NASA Marshall Space Flight. And here I am right here. I'm the rocket person. But you had all these other people that were doing things, and you needed, if you've got 20 kids coming in every week, you have to have plenty of adult chaperones to ride herd on everybody. But then you have to have a lesson each week of what are you trying to build, what are you trying to get done this week too. In those days, there was no RockSim or Open Rocket. If you wanted to determine the stability of your rocket, you had to use moments, and you had to calculate it the old-fashioned way using the positions of the elements, and you might even have to use something like this. There were calculators coming online back then, but slide rules still exist, and I still have a couple. We had to prove the rocket was stable. We had to do our own calculation on prediction using the basic equations and grinding them out. It was all old school, but that's how you did things back then. And then you had to document it here and present it to management. They even went so far, since they were treating this as a real NASA program and not a student version of it, we had to even do Monte Carlo simulations where we did statistical of where the footprint of the landing might be, and had to get that verified. So all of this was, the students kind of got grumpy about, they came in and they were just doing charts every week and doing presentations, and they wanted to launch their rocket. And they were bound by the school year. And May came along, the program was over, everybody graduated, went home, the rocket was never launched. And that was unfortunate. These kids got a little too much of the bureaucracy. None of them came back and worked for Marshall or even entered the space program, I don't think. I remember one girl saying that she never wanted to see another rocket in her life. And I said, well, what do you want to do as a career? And she said, well, I want to be a forensic scientist. And I said, okay, that sounds good. That's not rocket science, but that's science. And maybe we had an impact in helping them. If they didn't want to work for NASA, they'd learn that pretty soon. But that was a good program, and had a lot of kids involved and contributed to understanding really how does a work out. So they ended up, the rocket never got flown. It and all the parts and all the assembly were left for the next class last year, but for the next year, there were 2 more years they did the program, and then it was completed. The 4th program is pretty well known to everybody now, called the Student Launch Initiative in the beginning, and now it's just called NASA's Student Launch. That began in August of 2000, and I had been involved with the education department. Although I worked as an engineer, I helped them out as a volunteer. And I had been advocating, hey, can we do this again? Can we do another student launch program like we did with the Explorer post, except, fix a number of things so that we can actually launch the rockets. And I was ready to go with that, but, it never gets accepted until the upper management decides they want to do it. So Art Stevenson put out a mandate in 2000 that he went to the education department and said, hey, let's do a rocket program. And so they came to me and said, hey, you've done this before, what do we do? And so I began stepping out some ideas of all the lessons I had learned from the previous 3 programs, and put them together into what became SLI. And I had come up with the kind of initial mission statement of using sport rocket technology, build a rocket that can go to a mile in altitude and carry a half-pound payload and gather data and recover it safely. That was kind of the initial mission. And that was, again, this was high-power rocket coming into a level of credibility and reliability where it looked like that, hey, maybe student groups can sit together on their own and build these things and fly them. Let's find out. Maybe they can do this. And we found out that they were very capable in building a rocket, following the instructions, in designing a rocket, in designing a payload and integrating it and flying it and make it work. And that was very impressive. And not really been done very much in this particular time frame. It started off with 3 local high schools and 2 local colleges. We had the mile high target. We really focused on the high schools to begin with, and then later connected with the colleges a lot more seriously. And now the colleges kind of dominate the program. And what really brought exposure to the program was connecting it with TARC. TARC was started about a year later, and Marshall saw TARC doing a great thing and they wanted to be involved. They didn't know how NASA could be involved with TARC because in the first few years it wasn't. So I suggested to the educational director, well, you know, maybe these TARC teams, if you're wanting to grow this program to a national level and get outside of Alabama, maybe these schools would be candidates. SLI. They Rocketry, they have programs in place. Maybe they could build a bigger rocket and participate, and then you could have more than just 2 or 3 local teams. You could take it national. And so this was discussed and evaluated, and it happened. And so NASA got connected with TARC, and they started inviting teams, and we still are, and it worked great. And high school teams from all over the country got to come to Rocket City and fly their rockets. And then we had to build all the design, all of the infrastructure of how do you do that? How is your mentor involved? You know, you need to have a good local NAR section to support you in doing this. But all that came together and worked out. So the first launches were in October of 2001. I remember it well, unfortunately, because of September 2001, which was 9/11. So a month after 9/11, we're trying to roll out to the Army test range with some student-built rockets. And, you know, before 9/11, it was very easy to get in the garage, and afterwards, not so much. But we did conduct the program. The launches went well, very successful, and the kids had a lot of fun. NASA played it up as a big promotional thing. The center director there, Art, with the sunglasses on, was what he wanted, and we had put it up for him, and that was great. And then the trick was, well, do you want to do it again next year? And how many years can we make this last? It's always a big issue with NASA is funding. You don't always know if you're going to be online or in business or not. But we were able to. We started off, you know, with the small flights, expanded it, and now here this year, 100th flight will be made through the student launch program. And I could talk more on SLI. There's a lot more to say, but I just wanted to show how Hera was involved with that and how all of that got started through a local NAR section, and how these programs were built on each other. They were progressive in starting simple with one rocket and a few schools, going up to many other schools, implying more of the technical engineering, science, and project management incorporated into finally becoming a nationwide program that for NASA programs, but what if you can't get in there? What if you can't participate? You don't have to be in SLI to be flying students.
We didn't do it 30 years ago.
We started our own program, and there is a way that you can start your own program too, within your club, within your group, or even as an individual, to have a similar launch program like this. You need to have somebody who's high power certified and has some rockets. It might be a whole club, it might be just an individual. And it's simple enough, if you have some big rockets, to add a payload section to it to make room for launching some student experiments. Your rocket may already have a payload section and have room for doing that, so you're halfway there, particularly if you've already got a place to fly and maybe a place for your students to work and do this. If you have already doing a TARC team, it's really a simple step to go up from that. The organization is similar. You just have to do a little bit more rocket building, and then make sure your program is
get it done, get started early as soon as school starts, and then get done before
spring and everybody graduates. And I have seen over the years there are, you kind of try to make a formula. You need to first of all have a ready Rocketeer, and that may be you. It may be a kid at school who's a super nerd, a Sheldon Cooper type who wants to really get into this, but you need your spark plug who really can be your kind of your lead focus point to bring this together. Information, someone knowledgeable, and then you have to have a teacher who is good with all of this. And generally they will be more excited about the program than you will. And if they are, then that'll really work because they can direct and put together how it's going to be integrated into their classroom, how it will match up their standards and curriculum, and time, classroom time. So you got to have a teacher on board, and then you got to have the teacher's principal to be agreeable and not afraid that you're going to burn down the school or kill. Understand that rocketry is safe and it is useful, and it is really a good way to teach science. And if you can look at other schools that have had rocketry programs, they have advanced their entire level of recognition and certification in some cases because they've had rocket programs. So you got to have an administrator who will let you do it and be working with you and not trying to hold you back. Hopefully your teacher will have the rest of the class on board, and they will be wanting to participate as well as the rocket people, the class. There'll always be things for them to do too in putting the rocket together and the program together. If you can have a club with the launches and with range operations, that helps a lot too. And you get a really good program. And I have these images here, your ready Rocketeer, your teacher, your administrator, your class and your club. And so that's kind of a little cartoon to help you remember that. But the more of these you can have in place, the better your program would be. It's kind of a template for putting it together. You don't have to go this way, but it's kind of hints of how to get it done. If you are starting with a TARC team, this upper slide shows a TARC rocket of an ERF powered egg carrying device. The high power rocketry is going to be a little bit larger. What I show here is a SLI team. This was actually Madison West from a few years ago that have been always big players in TARC and SLI, and they show that the rocket's going to
high power rocket. You understand that
be on a, it could be just an H or an I, or it might be a J. You want to have a dual deployment system, something. This is a sudden rush PML kit that we used that worked out real well as a prefab rocket, where you could put it together and you had good confidence in its stability and how it would work. And then you would be just adding a payload section to the nose where the experiment would be, and where your technology was going to be for the experiment. So it might be something like this. You might have a larger rocket with other petitions in it, but that's one way of doing it. It's a simple way to get started. The other way is, if you have a larger rocket and maybe smaller experiments, is to use these Tupperware containers or something that you can stack inside the payload section, which will facilitate your installation and integration, and also make it easier for you as the rocket user to get the rocket ready. You just drop these things in here and tie on the nose cone, you're ready to go. Then when you take it apart, you just hand the cans back to the students, and they go evaluate their results. That's going to work for the simpler experiments, maybe with more elementary, middle school type experiments. But if you want something more complicated, you'll have to have other arrangements. But as far as, minimal things to do a program, that's a great way to start, is just give the kids canisters. So this is kind of also borrowed from what was done with, where they had
a program called the Getaway Special, where they would have
space on the shuttle and would need to put ballast in it. So they would solicit student experiments, and they would put their payload on the shuttle and fly it that way. And the shuttle didn't ever have to worry about what it was doing. It was, but it would be able to launch the experiment. And that's one way of doing it. Along with flying the rockets, you do have to teach the students about stability and weight management, and what's going to happen to their payload, the forces on the rocket, and prod them to stay on schedule, to know when the launch is, to have it ready for launching, and to be ready with all of their parts, and to start soon enough to design the thing, to test it. They may want to do their own drop test, or they may
launch it in a smaller rocket
before it's put on the high power rocket. And then if you want to have them do a report or readiness review to defend to go, that's pretty educational too. There's so many things about these rocket projects that are educational and useful life lessons, more than just science. And that would be communication skills, documentation, organization. All these things are important to rocket science and to life in general. And there's not a lot of ways in school that they learn this, besides just, showing up. So there's a lot of things to learn. The NAR section, or your rocket club, and you can be AAA, that's fine. It's just, talk about NAR. Any organizing group can do this, and you don't need to be part of NASA. You don't have to have helping
NASA.
You are just taking really your TARC type rocket to the next level. And in doing this, you can expand your rocketry program. You can get more community involvement. You might need to have sponsors, and it's fine to have Tony's Pizza logo on the side of your rocket. TARC teams do that, and they can do that on a big rocket too. So if the Rocket Club is already launching big rockets or even wants to, this might be your leverage to say, hey, community, we would like to do a student launch, but we need a big field and we need your approval and help us out. And the Rocket Club wants to do it, but we need some help on that. Maybe that would work to get that going as well. And it would give more visibility and credibility to your Rocket Club. There are any kind of simple payloads to begin with. There are a lot more available now than there were 30 years ago.
There are avionics,
accelerometers, flight recorders, telemetry devices, cameras and such. And you can do electronics, but you may have students, we have found, that wanted to just launch some seeds. And well, what's the experiment there? Well, you are still trying to teach the scientific method, and you want them to learn about control and experiment. So you have two groups of seeds, some that you launch, some that you don't. Then you plant them and compare how they come up to see if the acceleration effects of space flight have impacted the growth. Let them come up. There's no end of things that you can come up with that students can do. And you can find the ideas on the internet that have already been done that have worked really well. And you want them to participate in the design and the building. But it should be an experiment rather than just launching something to see what. Those are kind of crude, but you'd like to teach science in that in a science fair. You're doing a test on something, you're measuring something, you're trying to have an hypothesis and some data. And the science teacher probably is going to have to do that. You're mainly just going to provide the rocket and launch the experiment, but you can try to encourage them to direct their experiments that are more scientific. Once everything's ready to go, you go out to the field and you have a high power launch. For the NAR Club, the pads and the range operation is all the same. Attention to the students that are out there, but you install the payload in the rocket, launch and get it back, celebrate the launch. It's pretty much another good launch for everyone. So in building the program, you have to start kind of small. You want to start with kind of what the template for what you would do in a TARC program, then try to work into a little bit more commitment from the school, maybe some extra funding because you've got bigger rockets, and then you can finally get up to launching some kind of student experiment. The whole rocket could be the experiment, but generally to start off to begin with, just have the payload in the experiment, and then ultimately maybe into them building something. They would need a lot more supervision, and of course it would always be the club or a certified individual that owns the rocket and is responsible for it. I had been involved with it. I've many other programs going on in the country. One really very successful one is called ARLIS, which is done out on the West Coast. And there have been articles about this program in Sport Rocketry. And I think there was a presentation at NARCon last year. So I can refer you to those sources for more information on how this program works. It's very well organized, been very successful for many, many years. And you can get some good ideas from them and maybe even participate if you're in that part of the country. The Spaceport America Cup is a similar program to the NASA student launch. It's a little bit larger. It's not been around as long, but they have more teams because they allow schools from other countries to participate. Argonia Cup is also a competition for college teams to design and launch a rocket. more
programs going on. It's been very successful how
these programs have come up at different schools and different regions, and have worked with the sport rocketry community to really build up
and use sport rocketry for education. And it's really
caught on and developed a lot of credibility and grown quite a bit. So you can do this too. I've only got a few charts left because I'm almost out of time. Do you want to do this? You have to decide, you know, are you gonna get into it or not? It's like any other program, but once you get started, you can put it together. It becomes a lot of fun. The schools love it once they see what you're doing. The parents love it because they like that you're teaching their kids useful skills that will apply to scholarships and job interviews. Rocketry education is incredibly for the 65 however long we've been going in NAR that rocketry has existed. It has changed lives. It has brought about a Rocket Boy experience. If you remember the October Sky movie from Homer Hickham's book, you learn how to mature. You find out what you are, who you are, what you like to do, what your talents are, and all of these life in being and having done rocketry. The teachers realize this. They see the maturity that the students gain in being on a rocket program, and they have seen how students have used their experience in getting interviews, getting scholarships, and being prepared. And even if they don't go on to college and become rocket scientists, there are many who have been, because of their exposure in rocket, gone on to vocational schools and become electricians and welders and sheet metal workers, because those are the people who really build the rockets. The rocket scientists don't, hammer the tubes out. Somebody's got to do that, and you don't have to have a college degree necessarily. So rocketry can take you a lot of places, not so much to be a PhD, still into a technical field that really helps the workforce. And we have seen this played out over and over wherever there have been rocket programs conducted by a rocket club embedded in the schools. The student interest in STEM has gone up. The grades have improved. The families like that the kids are not getting into trouble, that they're learning a vocation and a skill and helping them make decisions about their future. So rocketry education really works, and NAR is proud to be part of that. Really, the educational rocketry is really the fulfillment of Stein's vision when he created NAR and Mile Rocketry way back when. The whole idea was to keep kids from blowing themselves up so that they could grow up and be working for NASA with all their fingers and eyes, and that there would be a safe way to learn science and fun. He didn't try to create a hobby, but he did. And it really worked and is still working to teach this generation and every generation of future scientists. Pretty much every astronaut has built a Mile rocket before they have flown, and they are still doing that. So we have this, this placard to show that you want to go to space, you want to go to Mars, you need to begin with a rocket. And I made this chart way back before COVID. I don't mean to make light of pandemics or anything, but rocketry is a lot of fun, and it works really well in the schools. And this is my email if you want to be in contact with me for anything. So I got some time left for questions, I hope, and we'll see if I can get any of those pulled up. No questions yet. And I really don't see any chat going on my screen, so I don't know if anybody's been listening or not. But looks like my session is about over, and I don't see any questions, so I don't see Todd intervening on me, so I'm going to hit the stop broadcast button. And thanks for listening, and we hope that you can watch this again on YouTube when it's produced for the editor's community. Okay. Hi, Nicole. And Nicole's coming up in a few hours. You want to listen to her talk too. So that's another education track for NARCON. But got a lot more sessions to listen to. I'll let you tune out and go to those. Thanks for listening. And you at education.nar. And have a good morning. Stop.